All right, we're back. It's another Carolina podcast. Welcome to spring, everybody. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. With me, as always, from Gamecock Central, obviously, Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, who are currently hammering away feverishly at their keyboards. They got to watch the first 3 segments. Sounds like the most riveting 3 segments we've ever seen of any South Carolina practice, spring or otherwise. And frankly, it sounds like y'all's fingers are about to fall off because you can't get all of your compelling thoughts on the page fast enough, guys. Welcome to spring. How does it feel?
It's here.
It doesn't feel like it's here, but
No.
it is here.
No. It sort of snuck up on us, and then it happened, and it was very quick, and now we're here.
Now we're talking about it.
It's a lot different.
Y'all don't sound too excited about it.
No, I mean, it's a lot different than back in the day. You know, we used to, whether it was spring or like preseason practice in August, there were some, you know, like I remember August practices under Steve Spurrier were like at night. What, at like 7, Wes, or something like that?
Very
6,
atmospheric.
7, something like that. And so you get people
It was
behind
an
the
event.
Yeah, you get people behind the bushes tailgating,
Drinking some beer.
We would take our tailgating chairs out there because we could literally stay the entire practice, and it would be like they were all open.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost all of them or all of them.
A distant memory.
Yes, it is a distant memory. It's a lot different now.
But y'all still got to see some of it. You got to watch guys run around. What are they, in shells today?
They're in just shorts and
Just shorts and shirts.
Shorts and
All
jersey.
right. So they look
practice jersey.
extra fast, extra explosive, extra lean. Paul Jackson's strength and conditioning program has already started to pay dividends over the course of a couple of months. I kid, of course, a little bit because there's only so much that we can learn from spring practice, especially from the little bits that we in the media are allowed to watch. But the fact of the matter is, spring is still here, and this is a huge spring for South Carolina because obviously they need to do a lot of things better to improve on a 4-8 season from last year, and they've lost some key pieces. Will Muschamp talked in his press conference yesterday. He kind of identified the key areas where South Carolina needs to get better. He talked about turnover margin. He talked about explosive plays. He talked about field position. He talked about red zone efficiency. He talked about, what was the other one? Fourth quarter, like being outscored 100-46 in the fourth quarter, excluding the Charleston Southern game or something like that. So basically, Carolina needs to do everything better, and it starts this spring with just the fundamentals.
Well, the interesting thing is that is also Muschamp's 5 key pillars to success. The areas he said that they need to get better in are literally the 5 areas that he identified extremely early on in his tenure as just analytically or statistically, if you do these things, you win. If you win these 5 areas, you're going to win the football game almost every single time. And I used to track it a little bit better than I did this past season. But you know, if you go through and look at South Carolina's games, when they win 3 or 4 of those 5 areas, they generally win the football game.
Yeah.
So
well, Will Muschamp tracked those numbers. I was surprised, not surprised that he had them at the ready, but I was surprised at how 1-to-1 they seem to be. He said South Carolina won the turnover margin in 4 of their 5 games, in 5 games, they won 4 of those 5 games. Mm-hmm. And they were even or lost a turnover margin in 7 games, and they lost all 7 of those games. And I think it was the exact same ratio with explosive plays. They won the explosive plays margin in 5 games, won 4 of them, lost it in 7, and lost all 7 of those games, which I could have easily gone back and done this research, but I didn't, so hopefully one of you did. Do you know the game that South Carolina won the explosive play margin and lost, and the turnover margin that they won and lost the game anyway?
Oh, God.
I don't. Let me effort that. I'll be the, Paulie or whoever does
I'm thinking
all the
maybe
research.
Florida was one of them, because that was a game where Carolina played well for most of it. Now, I don't know if that would have been explosive plays or turnovers. I'm just spitballing.
Because they turned it over. They had the Helinski fumble. Seems like there was another turnover in that game. Now, Jamie Robinson also had an interception. That I don't know. We'll let
point
Chris
will effort it, and we'll vamp in the meantime. But point is, he's identified these areas where South Carolina needs to get better. We're a long way away from knowing whether or not South Carolina will actually improve in those areas, or even whether what we can see in practice, what we can glean from what the coaches tell us, will give us any indication of whether or not that's going to get better. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a step back, and we're going to kind of go through position group by position group and see what Carolina has this spring, see where they need to get better, see what their chances are, and then maybe towards the end of spring, we'll have some better idea of what that looks like in aggregate and whether or not South Carolina can actually improve in some of those areas.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about some of those areas, at least for me, I question, as you go through all 5 areas, are these sort of the calls or the effect. And I think is maybe the best way I can say it. Look at explosive plays. Do you have more explosive plays just because, hey, you're a better football team, and you have more guys that can make explosive plays, or is that something you can somehow try to manufacture? I think if you look at, certainly with situational stuff like red zone, that's something you can put all the emphasis in the world on those particular scenarios, because it actually is a facet of the game where even the math of the game, like the metrics of the game, change because you're dealing with a much smaller area of the field. So you're running different plays, you're running different concepts. If you're on defense, you're looking for different plays, different concepts. So you can put more emphasis on those things. But then a lot of teams put emphasis on red zone. That's not anything new. So I wonder with those things, is it just about, hey, if you're a better football team, you're probably going to be better in these areas, and then you're probably will have won more games, or is it that you can actually get better in all these areas, and then because we do know they emphasize turnovers. Some analytics will tell you that turnovers are more random than any coach ever wants to admit,
especially fumbles.
Yeah, so but we saw early on in the Muschamp era, the first 2 years, the fact that they created so many turnovers, I believe, was the single biggest reason they won as many games as they did in the first 2 years. They had more turnovers caused than any other team in the SEC if you combine their first 2 years that Muschamp was here. So it dropped off a bit after that. So it's an interesting place to take it. It's an interesting sort of scorecard to sort of tell you where you are as a program, but I wonder which side of the line those things fall on.
And Muschamp, 2017 was the year that they were really exceptional at it. And, I've talked to some people around the program, like in hindsight, about that 2017 year. And the feeling was, interestingly, that, like, they weren't that good of a team. It was a little bit of smoke and mirrors. And the schedule wasn't as difficult as, say, 2020, or 2019 or 2020 probably. But they won, they were able to go win 9 games that year. And a lot of it had to do with the fact of they had a very positive turnover. I can't remember what it was, but a very positive turnover margin for really that entire season. And, they're able to go beat Michigan at the end of the year, all those things. And Muschamp, when asked about it, the sort of drop-off from 2017 to 18, and even he's talked about a little in 19, it's sort of why did that happen? He chalks it up to, we had a lot of veteran players in 2017. Talked about Sky Moore. Obviously, he was pretty adept at creating turnovers the pass game. Even some, they had Taylor Stallworth, Ulrich Jones, some guys that had been around for a while. So, I think some of it is, obviously to get an interception, a lot of times, sometimes you need the quarterback to throw the ball to you, to make a bad read. Sometimes you got to go make a great play on the ball or bait a guy, or sometimes you got to get a ball that's tipped and then you intercept it.
And that's a little more predictable, a little easier to manufacture because it's a combination of obviously good coverage with pressuring the quarterback. And there's some quarterbacks that just don't throw interceptions, but that's less random than fumbles. But the other part of that equation is that it's all a precarious balancing act because, and I didn't have this number at the ready, but Will Muschamp did, so I appreciate him coming to the press conference prepared yesterday. Even though South Carolina wasn't great in turnover margin last year, offensively, they didn't turn the ball over a whole lot. I think he said just 14 times for the entire season, so barely over 1 turnover a game. That's not a bad mark at all. I don't think it's elite. I don't know where that would rank in the 130 teams in major college football, but certainly in the top half, I would imagine. That's not a bad number. South Carolina needs to duplicate that, or replicate that, rather, and just get more production from the defense. So it's like, turnover margin wasn't good, but the offense really held up their end of the bargain last year. Despite, that was the only thing the offense did well.
In terms of,
that?
Well,
and ran the ball well for the first 8 games of the
with
season.
Consistency, and that is the biggest thing. And I think a lot of some of the turnovers are very untimely, in terms of when they happened or where they happened. You think about, the last drive of the UNC game. Obviously, you're pressing there a little bit, interception to end the game, and then you look at the Missouri game, for instance. You have the fumbleception, whatever that was, or the
well, you have the pick six and the fumble recovery.
And the pick six, when you're driving down. So those are,
what a brutal game that was.
That's more when you throw a 100-yard or whatever it ended up being pick six. That's a little bit more,
You will lose every game you throw a 100-yard pick six.
Probably.
Just anecdotally, but I'm pretty sure that would be borne out statistically.
Yeah.
What all right, where do y'all think the turnovers lost? Where do you think that actually ranks? I've got
turnovers
it now.
Lost 14 over the course of the entire season.
In the country?
In the country.
I would say top 30.
Chris, you agree?
Let's say number 42.
Tied for 20th in the country. How many how many turnovers lost do you think the team that has the best, like the least in the country last year had? It's crazy.
6?
4.
Wow. 6.
Oh, 6.
Cool.
Very nice. Who was that?
Was that Air Force or something?
Oregon State.
Okay.
Well-coached bunch.
Now, a lot of these, a lot of the
Scrappy.
option teams end up having a lot of fumbles. It
That makes
seems, but
sense.
Oregon State, App State was 3rd in the country. Alabama 4th. Alabama was the best in the SEC.
Well, Carolina
Turnovers lost.
Didn't they turn Alabama over twice? They had a fumble, right? 2 fumbles? Maybe I'm totally making that up. It's so weird. The football. We're 3 months removed from the football season, and I can't remember a single thing that happened last season.
It's a distant memory.
I'm just all basketball in my brain. So sorry, I'm probably just saying wrong things that happened last season. But yeah, I mean, that's why this is so difficult, because that part of it's good. So if you're South Carolina, you got to hope that part of the turnover equation isn't random, and that's something that you can continue to do well this year. And frankly, and we're about to talk about it, we'll start with the offense as we go sort of position group by position group. South Carolina's returning enough offensively that you would like to think that that's something that wouldn't be crazy. Like that, it's weird, because going from 2018, where the offense was pretty good, averaging 30 points a game, it seemed like they were bringing back enough that the offense should have gotten better in 2019, and then obviously ended up just being one of the worst offenses I can ever remember watching at South Carolina. So I can make the same argument. Oh, you're bringing back 4 offensive linemen. You're bringing back a starting quarterback. You're bringing back a talented freshman running back and a 5-star guy, and yeah, you got some questions at receiver, but the offense stands to get better just because you hope for some like a standard progression of the talent of some of those guys. But I guess what I've learned is not to have too much faith in South Carolina's football team and offense in particular trending with any sort of consistent projection. But regardless, you want to keep that up. Defense needs to be better. Before we get into the position group by position group breakdown, like I said, y'all got to see the first 3 segments of practice this morning. Any notable observations?
I think, like you said, they're not in pads or anything yet. I tried to pay attention to the newcomers, which is something we always do. I think, first of all, Marshawn Lloyd, not that we got to see him really, frankly, do anything as far as plays go, but right. Just the physical presence is obvious and expected, but sort of confirmed. He's not the tallest kid, but he's just very thick, bulky, muscular build. One of these guys that's going to have a great low center of gravity, and and if you look at his high school tape, it sort of works into his favor, I think. And running back's really probably the only position I think in football that height really, I think, truly just doesn't matter. And I think Lloyd's probably the guy I was most interested in kind of getting a look at. We got to look at Luke Doty just sort of throwing, with Mike Bobo and the quarterbacks, but those are, I guess, the things that at least caught my eye a little bit. I know, Chris, you were watching the new offensive lineman a little bit.
Yeah, I got to check those guys out. They have, of course, Justin Turnitine. I always mess that up.
Turnitine.
We found the correct iteration, and now I'm sort of, doubting myself.
If you would have just confidently said it, no one would.
I think it's Turnitine, actually. I think it just came to me. Justin Turnitine, he's gigantic. This guy is absolutely huge, and he can move. Will Muschamp really raved about him on Tuesday during his press conference, talking about how, just the staff had been very impressed with his off-season program and how, just how he moves for his size. I mean, the guy's 6'7" or 6'8", and was he listed 330, 340?
So the next Corey Robinson.
That was one. Wes heard that comparison. Corey Robinson, another one that we heard when he was getting recruited was Trent Brown, who was at Georgia Military, also a huge, human eclipse type guy. And, Trent Brown, interestingly, was recruited to Florida by Muschamp, and then he played for a time for Eric Wolford with the 49ers. And then Trent Brown ended up being the highest paid offensive lineman ever in NFL history. So Jason Turnitine has a lot to live up to. I'm just kidding. He's not going to be – we don't know that he's going to – but he's going to get a look. Vershawn Lee, athletic guy from Virginia, former basketball player. And then Trey Jones. So there are 4, not 3. Trey Jones from Abbeville is a guy who obviously moves very well. And Tyshawn Wanamaker is a really big guard, I think guard type. So got to watch them a little bit. Watching Lloyd run around a little bit, catch some passes.
Any backflips?
Looks the part. No backflips. They probably prohibit him. Probably made him retire.
A good idea not to allow.
Backflips. I watched. Oh, one more. I was going to say I watched the Bucks a little bit.
I know we were talking about this a couple weeks ago. I was saying I learned how to do a backflip, and then I'm doing bad podcasting right now and showing Wes and Chris a video of me doing a backflip this weekend. I learned how to do it because I saw Marshawn Lloyd do it, and I was like, that's super cool. I need to
That's pretty
learn
impressive.
how to do that. So
good stuff.
So there you go. Maybe I'll post that in one of the...
You should.
Yeah, can I put... Yeah, I guess I'll post it in like the thread or something so people
Sure.
can know what I'm talking about. Yeah, into a foam pit, so I got to work on doing it on the ground. I haven't done it on the ground in like 6 months, so I probably forgot how to do it.
You got to land it.
Yeah, got to stick the landing. But yeah, no backflips for Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah, so the Bucks, that was one I wanted to watch a little bit because obviously DJ Wanham no longer on the roster, so it'll be up to... Jordan Burch obviously is going to get a look when he arrives, but he's not here. And so Brad
He's not here? Is he even coming to South Carolina? Has he sent in his letter of intent yet, Chris?
It's done.
Where's Jordan Burch? Where is he right now? Sorry, I'm doing it in anticipation of everybody else.
He's
sort of
probably
inaccurate
at Hammond School right now, I would hope.
Yeah, he's probably in D period right now. It's 10:30. If the schedule's still the same as when I was there, he's in D period right now, I think.
Yeah, so anyway, Bucks.
Bucks.
Rod Fitton sort of flashed a little bit to me. Just watching him in drills. He's a pretty rocked up guy. He's athletic. I know they'd compared him sort of to Bryson Allen Williams when he first got on campus. So
what does rocked up mean?
Sort of twitch, just jacked.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
I never heard that expression.
I remember Wes and I were covering a camp. I think like a summer camp last year, and we were like, who is this guy? And he was just huge. So Rod Fitton's an interesting one, and then Brad Johnson, Joseph Anderson was working with the edge guys. So I'm curious to see some.
I got something to add there. I'm wondering. I was looking at Joseph Anderson. I think he's slimmed up a little bit.
Yeah,
looking at him, and the defensive end spot is really sort of like in a good spot. You got Aaron Sterling coming back. You got JJ Ngbare coming back. You have other guys who can play that position. The Buck spot is wide open, completely wide open, I think. And just looking at Joe Anderson, I know he actually took some reps last year in practice at the Buck and had worked in there. This is a kid that a lot of people thought was going to maybe even grow into a defensive tackle. Like Chris said, he's with the edge guys right now. I'm wondering, we didn't really get like a sense of a depth chart at all. They didn't line up for a play. Sometimes the first 15, you can actually get that on defense. We didn't get that this time. I'm wondering if Joe Anderson doesn't factor in at the Buck position, and that becomes just an all-out battle. Now, if he wins the job, then, he plays there. If he doesn't, he could always, be a backup at the other sort of defensive end spot. But, I thought it was interesting getting back to the press conference as well as far as stuff we've learned this week that, that was something that was just never confirmed, partially because Jordan Burch didn't do interviews. Most guys, you have a good feel for how they're going to fit in because you interview them. You say, hey, what are the coaches telling you? Where are you going to play? Where are you going to fit? Some services even have Jordan Burch listed as a defensive tackle now. Mm-hmm. I never agreed with that take. I think he's a defensive end or, Buck in South Carolina scheme potentially. But that was interesting to see Muschamp confirm on Tuesday that's the plan for him.
Yeah.
He'll be coached by Mike Peterson at that position. And I think it's a fit, especially when you look at the fact that South Carolina is in pretty good shape at that spot opposite of the Buck.
Definitely. Well, and I think the other thing that it says is that the staff probably feels pretty comfortable about his ability to come in and contribute right away. Obviously not necessarily, playing 60 snaps a game, but it seems like they're doing that because if he's playing the Buck, he can play Buck at 265 or 270 where he is right now. Whereas if he's going to be a true defensive end, hand in the dirt, 100% of his snaps, he's probably going to need to be closer to 290, you would think, with his frame. And obviously you want to be careful bulking him up because you don't want him to lose his speed and what he can bring as an edge rusher. But I mean, that, like you're saying, it's a perfect fit just in terms of where his body is right now. And again, it wouldn't be crazy if it was like, okay, bring him in. If we think he's a true defensive end, maybe he plays a little bit, but maybe we try to preserve that red shirt, bulk him up a little bit, and then, have him factor in a little more heavily the next year. But that's like, no. Like, everything that he brings, like, ready to go. Like, his body is tailor-made for that position. So, it'll be interesting to see when he is asked to play coverage. Like, he's never had to do that before. What does that look like? There's just the process of him learning that. I asked Eric Kimmery yesterday, I was like, did he ever play coverage on a single snap as long as you coached him? And he was like, nah. But also it was like, he's smart enough to pick it up, which obviously if the coaching staff didn't think he could do it, they wouldn't ask him to do it. But it's just, probably a different exercise for a guy that's been on the line and less in space for his entire career. Yeah,
and I actually caught that segment yesterday. And two things. I think, first of all, I think a lot of people have sort of, you see Jordan listed at like 275. I know Kimmery said he's probably 265, 270 right now. You see him listed at that, and there's an assumption, he's going to easily put on 25 pounds and he's going to be an interior player. Well, first of all, when I have watched him play football, watched him play basketball, watched him in camp settings as well, to me, from a just body type standpoint, I think he's going to drop weight pretty quickly when he gets to South Carolina. So he's
going to be playing safety by his senior year is what you're telling me.
No, I'm saying I think relatively quickly he'll drop down into probably the 250-something range, and then we'll add it back probably relatively quickly in muscle as well. I think there's a sort of opportunity for him to reshape his body a bit. And then, the buck position, it really he's not going to be out there playing man-to-man coverage on slot receivers. That position at times has some coverage responsibilities, but I mean, if you went back and looked at the percentages, most of the time that spot is rushing, the passer. That spot is playing, even when they're in a three-man front and that spot's a linebacker, they're coming off the edge, or they're coming, the spinner position.
Yeah,
they're basically in the middle of the field. As they look like a middle linebacker for where they're lined up, but you're just trying to get penetration up the middle, basically. There are times when that spot sort of is out in the flat, but they're playing a flat zone coverage. You're not going to see him, I would say, I don't want to say never, but you're
running
probably,
stride for stride.
You're never going to see
fewer
him
than a dozen times in man coverage, and it'll just be with a tight end or something.
No, I would say fewer than two times. I've never seen. I don't know if I've ever seen the buck carrying the tight end down the seam.
No.
15.
That doesn't happen.
It's not a man coverage spot. When they drop back, it's either you're dropping back like some type of fire zone where you've done a zone blitz, or every now and then they have that look where basically he's spread all the way out into the flat, and you're trying to, for one, sort of jam. That you actually will see sometimes the buck jam the wide receiver out there, but then he's not carrying with the wide receiver down the field. He's staying out in the flat. So I think the fact that it's called the buck, as far as what they'll be asking him to do, is probably a bit overblown there.
And there's sometimes, there's a play, we diagrammed the play on Gamecock Central with Bryson Allen Williams last year, where in the Alabama, Najee Harris annihilated South Carolina in the pass game last year. And so there was one play that Bama just had on a good play against the defense, and basically they got Najee Harris isolated
on DJ Wanham.
On DJ
on
Wanham.
The touchdown pass where he hurdled whomever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So DJ, dropped back and ended up to where he had the back, and they sort of walled him off a little bit, and so he had to get on his horse and try to, chase the back. And Wanham's an athletic dude and a smart dude, and he saw it, but, he's Najee Harris. I mean, he's a five-star running back, so got there, and then he did the rest. But that's a play in those situations, those few times you might have that. Jordan Burch is an elite athlete. He's a guy that has a chance of staying stride for stride with a guy like that. And then, you put on his pass rush ability and all the different things he can do, and that's why it works out so well.
And his ability to run in the open field,
yeah,
is insane. I mean, he played running back, he played wide receiver. Some. I mean, we had somebody when he was in camp, the 7-on-7 camp a couple of years ago. Somebody came up to me and Chris and was like, "That guy could be an NFL tight end if that's what he wanted to be." So, I think it's a good fit, and it fits for what South Carolina's returning personnel is on defense, because that's, it hasn't really been talked about a lot, but that position to me is one of your biggest questions on defense. I know they need, if you look at last year, the spot on defense you say, man, they got to be better at that spot, is safety. But I think there are actually some pieces now in the defensive backfield where they have a chance to be good in the secondary.
Right.
You look at the other defensive line spots, you feel pretty good about it. You look at the other linebacker spots, you feel pretty good. The buck is the one spot where you're saying somebody has to step up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we'll get there. Before, I don't mind talking about Burge extensively because, again, he is not on campus right now. He's not participating in spring, so this is a farther off projection to basically preseason camp and the early part of the season. But do y'all have any more thoughts from anything that you saw this morning? Anybody that looked interesting running around, moving before we get into
I don't think we got to see
position?
enough.
Yeah.
If we got to see a little 7-on-7, well, how does Joyner look? I don't know.
And Carolina will have a couple more spring practices before we talk again next Wednesday, because today we're recording this on Wednesday, so they have practice. Is it Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Wednesday, Friday, Saturday?
No practice tomorrow.
Yeah, so Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and then they'll have at least one or two more by the time we talk next week. So probably a few more opportunities to see some interesting things in those early parts of practice. So we'll have more actual eyeball tests next Wednesday. But as today is the first day of spring practice, we're going to go through every single position and give, basically a depth chart, just kind of talk about what the status of this position is in spring. So excluding guys that are not participating in spring, if South Carolina were to have, if the spring game were against another team, which I think would be a cool and fun and interesting idea, what would the depth chart look like? And we'll start with the offense, and we'll start with quarterbacks. Ryan Helinski is full go in spring. He had his scope. He was fine. Got his knee cleaned up. He's good to go. DeCarrion Joyner's wide receiver. Jake Bentley transferred. Colin Hill is out, rehabbing his ACL injury.
Correct.
So is Luke Doty taking the second-string quarterback snaps this spring?
Would be him or Jay Urich.
Who also played some wide receiver last year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think day one, it's probably Helinski, Urich, Doty, right? Because
day one,
yeah, you want your freshman to have to sort of work his way up, but yeah, I mean, I think that actually works out very well for Luke in that he's going to get a ton of reps this spring. You sort of get thrown into the fire. In the quarterbacks, I think having to do some more under center stuff to sort of work on that footwork stuff. It's a big spring for them, mentally learning the scheme, learning some of that. When we were watching today, Bobo seemed, we couldn't even hear from the distance we were at. Just watching the body language, they were focused on footwork a lot when they were going through just some very, very early warm-up type stuff. So, I think that's the order now. By the spring game, does it look a little bit different? Potentially, but I would say that's where it is right now.
So where are y'all on Ryan Helinski? This is his second spring. Obviously, a lot of what we saw his freshman year in terms of how we assess him as a quarterback was clouded by the fact that he had at least an injury, maybe multiple injuries, the severity of which we will never precisely know how much it affected him, how much of it was pain, how much of it actually affected his mobility and things like that. But this is his second spring. This is huge for him, and he's the starter. It will take something heroic from Luke Doty or Colin Hill to supplant him. Not to say that it won't happen, but given the gap he has in experience, the fact that he was the starter for South Carolina all of last season, it's his to lose. So how important is this spring for him, and where are you on him?
I think it's a huge spring for Ryan. New scheme, new concepts. You're going under center. I would imagine. I mean, they did that a little bit last year. Don't get me wrong, but for the most part, you didn't really do it in high school. I don't believe in that scheme. So, I think it's massive for him just to get comfortable with Mike Bobo as his quarterback's coach, to get comfortable with him as a play caller, and get comfortable with the scheme, the new terminology, his wide receivers, all that stuff. I think if Colin Hill was going through the spring, I think there's even more of a sense of urgency there because he's going to have a feel for, what this scheme is all about. He's going to have a feel for what particular things matter most to Mike Bobo in any particular given situation. And, I think Helinski gets a little bit of a head start on Colin Hill because of the fact he's able to go through spring practice. But, I don't get the sense Colin Hill came in just to be a backup. Now, would he be a great backup as a veteran guy who you could feel comfortable coming in if needed? Absolutely. But I think it's going to be an interesting competition, and at the end of the day, that's a good thing for Ryan Helinski. I think he needs someone, to sort of push him to that next level as a quarterback, and I think he can lean on what happened last year. He can lean on the experience he got last year, and they obviously are going to need a little bit more consistency out of him this year, I think.
Some potential for the Tavian Feaster effect, where you just bring in somebody that's veteran that has experience. And in the case of Tavian, it was experience winning. In the case of Colin Hill, it's experience under Mike Bobo's system. Could ultimately be the best thing for Ryan. But have y'all heard anything from around the program that there's a sense that, how open is this quarterback battle ultimately going to be? Again, Colin Hill not being in spring, I think, does make a difference, especially for the early part of the season. But going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a real battle, honestly. Colin Hill has an NFL level arm. Like, this guy is a big-bodied. Now, he's not going to run it. He's not a guy that's going to bring much to the table as far as that goes, but can, throw the cliche at you. He can make all the throws. But, this guy's legitimately coming in to try and win the job. And I think what you hope is that it sort of forces Helinski to just take ownership of this team. Now, if you exit the spring saying this is Ryan Helinski's football team, not just his offense, this is his group, from a leadership standpoint, then it probably makes it very hard for anybody else to take that come fall. But,
and Hill rehabbing that injury, I think, gives you a lot of reason for optimism that Helinski could take that step.
The door is open for him to do that. Now, if they get to the end of the spring and you still are hearing stuff like, we need this, we need that out of the quarterback position, then I think it becomes a real competition, and and Hill becomes very much in that battle, I think. As much as we've heard lots of positive things about Luke Doty, and as high as I am on Luke Doty as far as the future, I think it'd be tough, considering the experience of those other two guys, it'd be tough for him to just straight up win the job and get in on that competition this fall.
Easy redshirt year, but still big for him to come in, get some experience, get that spring under his belt. The skill positions on offense are fascinating for different reasons. The running back room is significantly depleted. You lose Tavian Feaster, you lose Rico Dowdle, you lose Mon Denson, you lose A.J. Turner. I still throw him in the running back room, even though he didn't have a single carry last year, right? Or did he have one?
I don't think he did he?
I don't think he had a carry. Did A.J. have a carry, Chris? I can see the wheels churning in there. I
looked at the other day. I don't think so, but he might.
Point is, I'm still considering him an honorary running back because I was always a big A.J. fan, and I hate that it didn't pan out for him better. But you bring in Marshawn Lloyd. Are Amos or
Zaquandre
White early
summer
release?
guys?
No,
Summer guys?
Yeah.
So it's just Marshawn Lloyd, Kevin Harris, Deshaun Fenwick this spring in the running back room?
Scholarship running back, yep.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Marshawn Lloyd. That's his time. Now, I guess the X factor there is last year Kevin Harris could bench press or squat 600 pounds. Is Paul Jackson going to get him to 700, and what is that going to do for his ability to run the football?
And what does squatting 700 pounds look like? That would be a good
a lot of plates.
That's like the bar
video.
bending.
Yeah, the bar's just dying on either side. But yeah, Marshawn Lloyd, I think is your game, as we get way ahead of ourselves, is your game one starter. Like, that's a position you can come in and play if you're good enough. This guy is just different. He's built different, and I mean that both physically and mentally. He sort of has come in with an approach of, I'm here to prove myself, not, hey, I'm a 5-star, so everybody better already know that. Which is always good when you're recruiting a guy that's so highly recruited, or have landed a guy that's so highly recruited. The the other X factor in all this for me is Zaquandre White. And, getting him in school, getting him qualified, I believe is a need for South Carolina. I've heard that, he's a guy who can come in and potentially push Lloyd and Kevin Harris for the top spot as well. We've all seen you need a few backs that you can count on to at least go play well. I think the question for me, or the hope for the Carolina staff, is can Lloyd be that true difference maker at running back that South Carolina has sort of lacked. We talked about it going into last year that they had yet to sort of land that difference maker at that position. Taven Feaster, Rico Dowdle were both very good when they had room to operate last year, but to take an offense to the next level, if you look to me at the great offenses in college football today, almost all of them have a running back that can make plays for you, that can extend plays, that can turn a 1 yard run into a 4 yard run, that can turn a no yard gain into a 1.5 yard. The Marcus Lattimore effect. As a play caller, as a quarterback, as an offense as a whole, to me, there's nothing that helps you better than having a running back who can take what's there and tack on a couple of extra yards for you.
Behind him, Sean Fenwick and Kevin Harris have obviously been in the program. They're going to have an experienced edge over Rashad Amos and Zaquandre White. Do you think them being there in the spring, obviously they're going to be duking it out for 2 and 3 if we're talking about the spring depth chart, but does either one of those guys have a realistic shot at being the number 2 guy even after you bring in those other 2 highly rated guys later in the summer? And if so, which one? Sean Fenwick had more carries than Kevin Harris last year. Did you know that?
Yeah.
One more carry.
Yeah. So you're asking if Fenwick or Harris can be number 2 even after White.
One of those guys is going to be number 2 and one's going to be number 3 this spring. But can they do enough this spring to actually be the number 2 guy on opening day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be close.
Yes.
I say White. I have heard Fenwick had a pretty good offseason. But for Fenwick, it's always sort of like a prove it thing because he'll do some good things and he shows ability, and we know he has ability, but he's got to be more consistent. That's just the thing that they've been harping on for so long. And when he first got to Carolina, it was about him maturing just physically and work ethic-wise and all those things, and he made some strides there, and he's seen the field a little bit, but he's always had some guys ahead of him. So Harris, he's battled, he had an injury last year. I think he's battled a couple nagging things. He's healthy to start the spring. And he's a guy with ability, too. I think Harris is maybe a little bit more situational, as a guy. And White, at this point, may be a little bit more situational. He's maybe a guy that he's talented enough to maybe go be your starter if you want, but I think they're going to look to get him into situations, get him on the edge where he can run and things like that. So
the Jarvis Giles type.
That's the reason I said it may be close in that, you may see a lead dog, a Marshawn Lloyd, for example. That's who we think it'll be. And then you may see maybe not a huge drop-off in carries between whoever the number 2 and the number 3 is, but if I had to sort of handicap it, I'd say, honestly, the 2 newcomers, well, there's 3 newcomers, but I think Lloyd and then White may have the best shot, to be 1 and 2, but I think Fenwick and Harris are definitely going to be in there. I have the most conviction about Lloyd probably ending up as the starter at this point.
So it's not too strong a statement to say the number 1 running back spot is Lloyd's to lose already.
I don't think it's no.
No, I mean I don't think you're going to get Will Muschamp to say that officially. You know, I don't think that's like the officially. No, I just a coach is never going to think like that,
right?
But as far as just us talking about it, I mean, just the buzz you hear about this dude.
Mm-hmm.
If he's, I feel like if he's healthy, when South Carolina, even I know we're not talking about the fall, but when they run out there, the first running back to take a carry this year, I feel like is going to be Marshawn Lloyd. I don't know when that officially becomes the case. I doubt he was taking first team reps today. He's probably taking third team reps today, but the cream rises to the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, it's like your road to the Heisman in NCAA football. You always start as the third string, and then like by the fourth practice, you're the first string.
I remember when I've said this, used this example several times, but when Lattimore got on campus in 2010, he was not an early enrollee, so this was fall practice. But everybody saw him. Everybody, there's Marcus Sidemore, what's he going to be like? And we got to see him, and he looked good. But then we started hearing from within the program that this guy's the best back. It's not close. Now, we haven't heard that yet. They just started practice today. But we have heard the offseason that he had and what he's shown, the limited stuff they can do in the offseason, that he's been really impressive. And then you match that with, like, his high school tape and what he did there, and you can get a pretty good sense of how good a guy can be. And I think they've already, gotten a pretty good idea of what they've got in Marshawn.
Excited to see and hear what we're going to see and hear from Marshawn Lloyd throughout the course of the spring. The next skill position group, and y'all got a piece up on Gamecock Central right now, the most intriguing position for Gamecock football this spring. I heartily agree with you. By the way, for those of you that haven't read it, go to GamecockCentral.com and read it. Is this a subscriber piece or is this a free piece?
It's a subscriber piece.
Ooh, all right. So how can people subscribe to Gamecock Central if they want to read this awesome piece?
Type in Gamecocks promo, 50% off your first year.
Boom!
Or GC Pod.
GC Pod for all
the
beautiful
lesser option,
podcast listeners. It is the lesser option. It's 30 days for free, but if you're not sure if you're ready to make a very fair, very reasonable, and very worthwhile investment, and you want a trial period, you can do that. For 30 days free.
I assume there's probably a way to game the system there as well, but just sign up for Gamecocks.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff. Basketball's going on, baseball's going on, spring's going on. You don't want to miss everything. I got Wes and Chris's thoughts on what they saw today, but there are a lot of practices in between the days that we podcast, and they're going to be doing it every time there is practice to be watched by the media or otherwise. And if you don't want to miss any of that, GamecockCentral.com is your hub for all of that. So go ahead and subscribe. Use the exclusive podcast code or whatever you need to do, but just get on GamecockCentral.com. Go read this piece. We'll do our own version of it here. The most intriguing position for Gamecock football this spring is the wide receivers. You lose Brian Edwards, who has most of the receiving records in school history. He's cemented his legacy in the Pantheon. I don't know. He's top 4, top 6, 7 receivers, whatever, of all time. I still think he has the greatest catch I've ever seen in the history of South Carolina football. And you're bringing back, I don't know, almost nothing. I guess Shi Smith, who's like your theoretical best guy coming back, but he had such an underwhelming campaign last season. I don't really know what that means. You have Xavier Legette, whose physical promise is still certainly there and came on and was able to work his way into more playing time as a freshman, which is good. You have DeCarrion Joyner, who's seen the field a lot in pressure positions, not necessarily at wide receivers, so how does that factor in? You have Josh Vann coming back off of a broken hand, a guy with a lot of upside, a guy that West thought was going to be a breakout guy for Carolina last year. Obviously, his season's cut short by that hand injury. There's just a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot up in the air, a lot of potential for guys to come in and just say, this position is mine. I wouldn't even say it's a shoehorn. That if you told me this time, not even this time next year, if you told me by the end of this football season that Shi Smith was like the third most productive receiver for Carolina this year, that would not shock me, just because there's so many question marks there.
Yeah, and I think, you look at the group and there's some talent there. Like, I don't even think you look at it and go, there's just no talent here. Like, I don't look at it that way. I just look at a group of guys where you got to somehow turn that potential into production. And so, no, you don't have a guy. South Carolina's lost 2 of the best receivers in school history the past 2 years back-to-back with, Deebo Samuel and then Brian Edwards rolling off the roster. And I think if you look back at the Spurrier era, they would lose a really good receiver and then somebody would step up, and become that top guy. And they were generally pretty good, but, they also had a really good defense during the height of those years. They also had really good quarterback play. They had a bunch of different receivers.
Like Alshon to Ace to Bruce.
Right. And it was guys that, had
Alshon to Ace to Bruce to Pharaoh.
Right. Yeah. And it was guys that had played and sort of come up. So they still have some guys that have played some ball. And I'm not saying any of the guys on the current roster are as good as any of those players that we mentioned, because right now there's not evidence of that. But they do have potential. I mean, Shi Smith has shown he can be a game breaker. Can he be consistent? That's the question. Josh Vann, I'm still convinced, has a lot of ability. But as Pearson, I'm sure you're about to point out, led the SEC in drops.
And only had he had fewer than 40 targets last year.
Right. But, and the crazy thing about that is in high school, he was touted for his hands. I mean, he had really good hands. So he just had a bad sophomore slump.
Much mental as anything.
It's mental, yeah. Xavier Legette never played receiver before last year. He has a huge upside, a big guy that can run. DeCarrion Joyner is a very interesting option there. So, I mean, they have, or Trey Smith, a guy that was injured. He caught 30 balls as a freshman. He looked pretty good. So they just have so many question marks. And number one, can they stay healthy? Number two, what's the rest of the team look like around him in terms of quarterback play, protection, play calling, all these different things. But I think if you're taking maybe some hope in it, you go, there is some talent here. But the flip side of that, the reason for some pessimism is to go, there's nobody that's really, really proven here. And so that's the question that they're going to have to solve throughout spring, summer, and then preseason. So the spring's going to be really big for everybody on the roster.
If South Carolina's spring game were against another team, who would be the starting? We'll do starting 3 receivers because we'll say Carolina's in 11 personnel. Who are the 3 receivers lining up to start for Carolina?
I would probably say Shi Smith or Trey Smith, Xavier Legette, maybe. Chris?
Are you playing Shi in the slot?
Yeah.
Or outside? That's sort of been my question is, because Shi's worked at both, do you play him outside? Do you play him in the slot? I think the ideal situation is to play him in the slot, because that's when you get some matchups. You can run him. He's really adept at that slot fade type route. You can get him over the middle, let him catch the ball, let him run. So, yeah, I think if that's your sort of configuration, then, yeah, I think Josh Vann would probably be the 4th guy maybe, or maybe even sneak into the 3rd somewhere. Or
to carry on Joyner.
I'm really intrigued by him too. But I think he's just going to need, if the spring game, so we're not even going all the way into the season, I think Joyner's still going to need some adjustment time because, he bounced back and forth a little last year, and then he was injured for part of the time. So he's missing, not only is he not getting game reps at receiver, he's not even getting practice reps some weeks. Or he's working at quarterback when he's injured. So I'm with you on that, I think.
Fascinating. It's anybody's spring. And I think that's going to go into the summer, and I think that's going to go into preseason camp and probably go into the season as well. But that's the position group that I think we're all going to be watching most eagerly in the spring. Next up, this one is, I think, simultaneously the least interesting position to talk about in the spring and does have some intrigue because going into the 2020 season, Nick Muse is going to be the number 1 option at tight end for South Carolina. He's obviously missing the spring with the ACL injury. So what's happening now over the course of the next couple weeks is a battle for who is going to be Nick Muse's backup at the beginning of the season. How do you see this panning out?
That's a good question. I think it's a big spring for Keyshawn Toney. It's a big spring for Trey Kenyon. Kevion Mullins working there now as well. I think that's interesting. I think I wonder how his size, if he's big enough to sort of be an every down type tight end, or if it's more just he's a tight end by name, but he's sort of a wide receiver playing tight end. Does Adam Prentice, the transfer fullback, get some time, as tight end? When I was watching Colorado State last year, or clips from Colorado State last year, they moved their fullbacks and H-backs and tight ends around a lot and put them at various spots. So I think that's a factor there. Then you got Chandler Farrell, who played tight end in somewhat blocking situations last year, but then other times true tight end as well. So
always looks funny to see him rumbling downfield, though, just because he has more of a traditional offensive lineman body. He's, what is he, 6'1" or 6'2"?
Right.
Like it's just when he goes in
looks
there,
like a center.
Well, it's a combination of that and the fact that he was wearing number 31. I don't know if he switched jerseys this offseason, but whenever you see 31 running, you're like, what? I've never even seen that number on a football field.
Yeah, so I think it's very much wide open as far as like behind Nick Muse. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, and we keep getting ahead of ourselves. I think these 2 freshmen that enroll in the summer are going to get a big look with Shaw and Bell.
Yeah,
Eric Shaw is a freak. So now they'll be a little behind the curve in terms of blocking and all that, but yeah, we need to keep it. I need to stop getting on summer or preseason ball, and we'll get to that when we get to it. But yeah, for the spring, I think it's behind Muse, who, as you said, is missing the spring, is wide open. So I think it's going to be big for all of those guys. They'll be working with Joe Cox, and I think there's some. You feel a little bit better about the pass catching aspect. I think you got Mullins, who's a converted wide receiver. You got Kenyon, who was a really good receiver in high school from his tight end position. So I think it's just going to be about bringing along, the inline blocker. Muschamp mentioned Will Register yesterday. And to date, he hasn't made a big impact. He's played special teams some. So does he work in there a little bit more as that blocker type? Maybe.
Make a pick.
Backup? Primary
no,
backup?
Your number one tight end at the end of spring.
At the end of spring. Still Nick Muse. But the second guy.
For this imaginary game that they're playing against, they're playing against Purdue for some reason. I just decided that.
I have mine.
Well,
I got a good feeling about Keyshawn Toney.
Keyshawn Toney?
Just because
yeah.
I think he's got a little bit more of that blocking edge to him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Bobo's tight ends traditionally, go back to even his Georgia days, they've had to been able to block. Now, he's had some freaks at tight end that could go out and make plays for you. But it was more off the play action game, getting them open down the seam, stuff like that. I think Keyshawn Toney probably fits some of the things they're going to be looking for at that spot. Not as dynamic as the other guys, but for what they're looking for, either him. Yeah, I'm just going to say him, but it also depends on how much Adam Prentice plays at like tight end versus fullback, I think.
Yeah, I think in certain it'll depend on package really, and we're not. I'm not trying to go that it'll be close or what hedge my bets type of route. But I mean, Muschamp specifically mentioned that yesterday about playing Prentice into certain roles. So I think him in situations, but I would have to go with Wes. I mean, Tony Kenyon would be maybe my backup to the backup, just because I like his potential as a pass catcher. But I think the blocking element is certainly going to be big.
All right. You have your predictions in, and if you're wrong, we will rake you over the coals at the end of spring practice.
That sounds good.
Not that there's going to be any depth chart or anything like that necessarily that will mean anything. The position group that we'll probably be able to learn the least about, frankly, over the course of spring is going to be the offensive line because, you're limited in terms of what you're doing, in terms of the amount. I mean, you only have 14 practices left, and they're not in pads yet, and they're going to have a few more that are not in pads, I would imagine. I guess I don't know the exact schedule, but it's going to be hard to learn a lot about the offensive line. But this is a really intriguing position group going forward. You lose Donnell Stanley. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that was it. Not even any backups. You got a lot of guys returning with experience. There was injuries and things that had a bunch of different guys playing a bunch of different positions. We'll just jump to the starting five because that will, I think, spur a lot of discussion. And we'll start with Wes. I just combined both of you, so that way I don't have to commit to starting with either one of you. Wes seems to need less time to compile these things in his head, so I'll give you time to think about it, Chris. Wes, left.
Man.
Well, no,
Said I was a slow thinker.
You're just more careful about these things. You're terrified of being wrong, which is why you have to hedge everything with it's close. Wes doesn't mind just throwing out some flaming hot takes.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Flaming Hot Cheetos. Wesley,
go
left or right. I know, right? Yeah. Flaming hot take. Go left or right and give me your starting offensive line for South Carolina at the end of spring.
Let me just say that it's going to be close.
Okay, good. Yeah, I appreciate that hedge. Yeah.
And but we also have to put it out there that Dylan Wanham will not be able to practice. So, again, this is another situation where it's going to be different in the fall. I'm going to say Ja'Kai Moore is your starter at left tackle at the end of the spring. That Sadarius Hutcherson is your starter at left guard. That I'm going to circle back to center. Javon Gwynn is your starter at right guard.
So he needs time to think about center. Just point that out. Okay.
Jalen Nichols is your starter at right tackle.
And your starting center is?
Hank Manos.
Hank Manos?
Yes.
Cool.
Now, I got a question for Wes. Was it between Manos and Murphy or Manos, Murphy, and Eric Douglas?
I almost went Eric Douglas.
Okay.
I think
it's gonna be.
I was very close. Eric Douglas started at the beginning of the year last year.
Yeah.
So did Hank Manos. So that's wide open. You could always slide Javon Gwynn to center potentially as well. And they may would put Hutcherson at left tackle now because Wanham's not in there, but I ultimately believe that Hutcherson's best spot is inside at guard. And I think...
And Jalen Rhodes is your sixth guy? Your swing guard?
Jordan Rhodes, yes. I think they have enough guys at tackle to feel comfortable playing Hutch at guard. And then that actually gives you the freedom to maybe play one of these other guards at center if needed. And then we know Wanham's going to be a starter ultimately at one tackle spot. So basically, Ja'Kai, Jalen Nichols, Jasmine Turntine.
Yeah, I wanted to give Chris some time just to see if he would work up the courage to put Turntine as a starter at the end of spring.
So it helped with a JUCO guy to actually be able to go through spring as well. I think that's huge.
That was the case with Dennis Daly because he got a spring, right? Didn't he enroll early?
He didn't.
Oh, he didn't even enroll early.
Okay. And then still took over the starting spot. A couple of games into
2 games in or
his
3 games
junior year?
in. Yeah. That was a great pickup for them. He was awesome.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now. I think the good thing for them about the O-line is there are a lot of options. So, and it's a domino effect where one guy plays will sort of affect the other spot. So it is hard to project, but yeah, that's where I have it right now.
You ready?
Yeah. I'm going to be with Wes on Ja'Kai Moore at left tackle. Left guard, Hutcherson. That's pretty easy, I think.
I mean, unless you wanted to put Hutcherson at center and put Jordan Rhodes at left guard or something.
But we've never heard about Hutch cross-training at center, though.
No, but just as a guy that has experience, as a guy that has played everywhere on the line.
I think he'll definitely
be
your
veteran leader.
Guard spot.
Yeah,
I mean, I think so, too. I'm just throwing a wrench in there because you got to figure out that center spot.
The toughest one's center because you got, at least 3 candidates. And, man, I just have the Vincent Murphy, I know they really liked out of high school. He just wasn't quite ready last year. Neither was Hank Manos, neither was Eric Douglas at guard. So you got 2 guys that have played some. Hank's played some. Douglas has played a decent amount, and he played on special teams. I'm gonna go Douglas for spring ball, but I think Murphy may eventually make a move.
Cool.
And I wouldn't rule out Manos. I'm just talking about upside
so
wise.
Your third pick is Wes's first pick, and that's why I like doing this podcast.
Right. Right guard, I'll go with Gwynn. And Jordan Rhodes is very close in there. Like if Gwynn messes up, hey, Jordan, go in. Right tackle, Jalen Nichols. I don't feel good about center at all. I'm almost just like guessing on it. But I don't even know if Eric Wolford could be like, yeah, it's this guy by far. It doesn't really seem like that right now.
It's kind of unfortunate. I mean, the Dylan Wanham's missing the spring because that does complicate the issue a little bit, especially the way that we're having this conversation, and also that there is, I don't want to say so little to be learned, but I guess less to be learned, like I said, about the offensive line than any other position group over the course of the spring. And for Carolina, it's good and it's bad because, like I said, you have guys that have a lot of experience, but not a ton of experience, just guys that have played in a couple games here and there. In the case of, like, I don't know how many, off the top of my head, how many games Jalen Nichols and Ja'Kai Moore played last year, but I'm guessing it's about 6 each. 6-4, 7-5, something like that. I mean, they played less than half of the season, so they have some experience and they've gotten some meaningful snaps, but it's not a boatload of experience, and especially if you're still looking for the anchor. And I guess Zadarius Hutcherson, comes back as sort of your emotional anchor, your like intellectual anchor in terms of the guy that's going to be the leader on that line and kind of organize everybody else. You would love for that to be coming from your center position, and if you want to be worrying about, or if you are worried about one position, centers, I don't know, is that the worst position to have so completely up in the air? Like that or left tackle? Probably center, though.
Yeah, probably those two.
From a physical standpoint, though, I feel like that's the easiest position on the line to play.
Center?
Yeah. I mean, you got to, that's where you sort of, you can hide a guy that's very good mentally, but maybe isn't as big. I mean, you see smaller centers all the time. Like, you got to have, in a perfect world, an athletic freak at left tackle. You got to have some very strong dudes at each guard spot. I think your left tackle is probably, not for South Carolina, I'm talking generally, that's the spot where you'd be most worried about not having a guy. I think they have so many, because they cross-train kids at center throughout their career if they think, Wolford's talked about that before, we're getting this guy snaps at center in practice. There's so much cross-training at that spot. I just think it'll sort itself out eventually. And is it Eric Douglas? Like I said earlier, you could slide Javon Gwynn. If you think Jordan Rhodes is a starting guard, you slide Javon Gwynn to center.
You would slide Gwynn more than Hutcherson?
Yes.
To me, that seems like what they did with Stanley last year, though. It's like they needed some
but
stability
Stanley
there.
He played center.
But what you're saying is they cross-train everybody, and you can kind of stick anyone in that position. Sounds like they should just put DeCarrion Joyner there.
That's not what I said. But
That's not what I said.
That's not what I said.
Why would you slide Hutcherson out of a spot that he can firmly just lock down and you feel
sure? I mean,
he's an NFL
for the
guard.
exact same reason you did that with Stanley last year.
But Stanley
is a guard.
Stanley, I mean, that's not. I wouldn't say that.
You would say he's more of a center than a guard?
I think he played better at center personally.
What's he playing now?
Get ready for the draft.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like in the NFL, he's going to be a guard. He's not going to be a center.
We don't know that.
Why not?
We know that?
I don't know. I just feel like he's a guard. But it was out of necessity.
But why?
I just feel like that's what he is.
I have no, because I don't know. I guess because that's where they wanted to start the season with him. I think whatever offensive line you start with, that's what the coaching staff feels like is kind of the best position for all those guys, and then you scramble based on need. Like if they thought Donnell Stanley was the best option at center, wouldn't they have started him at center? They feel like he's probably a better guard. But point is, they needed leadership. They needed an anchor at the center of the offensive line, so they took their most veteran guy, their most experienced guy. You're the guy that's calling out the coverages most of the time. You're the guy that's having to pick up on a lot of the whatever the defense is doing and communicate that to the rest of the guys. Don't you want your most veteran guy there?
Not if he hasn't played the position and he's played.
Yeah.
He's played tackle or guard his entire career. Like I feel like you're trying to reinvent the wheel if you do it in this case. With Stanley, it was an easy move because he's played center a ton in his career. And they thought Hank Manos was ready to take over that spot at the beginning of last year and then proved that he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then you move him back, solidify it, and you had a lot of young newcomers around Stanley as well. So it helped to have that guy in the middle who could direct traffic, I guess, so to speak, around him. And it just made sense. But I don't think it would make sense to worsen one of your other positions when Hutch has proved clearly. And I thought he was okay. He was solid as left tackle. But I think he's firmly proven as a guard in this league. And you can really just lock down one of those spots. I really think center will work itself out. It is hard to predict exactly which guy, but that's a good thing in this case because I think there are multiple options.
All right, well, let me say it like this, just to further confuse things. If even though he hasn't played there, and I don't think this is in the cards. From everything that we've heard, from everything that you guys have said, this is not going to happen. But I just wonder when you have a position like that that's so up in the air, if Sedarius Hutcherson, just by virtue of being big and strong and having played offensive line for a long time now, is 10% better, just 10% better than any of the three options that South Carolina has at center right now. And he's 10% better than Jordan Rhodes at left guard. Do you think they would go with 90% of what they could have at center for 100% at left guard, or do you think they move their 100% option to center and have 90% at left guard?
I think they keep Hutch at left guard.
Same.
Cool. All right.
I think we're overthinking it.
I'm just trying to stir things up here.
You've done well.
Good.
And I don't think so. I think they'll feel like Hutch is probably more than 10% better at whoever at guard.
Cool.
And the other thing is, I don't think that South Carolina, whoever starts at center out of one of those three guys, and maybe they do say this isn't working, we got to move somebody else other than these three guys to center, then they may, maybe they got to move somebody over. But if it doesn't work with one of those three guys, then you have more of a problem. Also, don't think that any of those three guys is going to be, say, one of the best centers in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of them are going to be as good as Donnell was last year at center,
mm-hmm.
right? But if they can find a guy that they feel good about,
right,
that's really the key.
And fortunately, what we just learned from Wes is that center doesn't matter, so they can just put anybody in there. So that's great news for South Carolina as they try to figure out the offensive line this spring.
The great twister of words, yes. Pearson Fowler. Everyone.
I do it for a living. So we're just over an hour, and we haven't touched the defense yet. So let's save that for next week. We'll have more spring thoughts. We'll go through position by position, do the exact same thing. Kind of what is the depth chart? What would be the starting group and all the backups for this imaginary South Carolina-Purdue game that's going to happen in the middle of April?
I would love if that was a real thing.
That'd be great. I wish they did spring scrimmages like that. That'd be a lot of fun.
I wonder who the starting punter. That's something else you have to talk
Ooh, yeah,
about.
okay, we'll do defense
starting
and special teams
punter
next week.
at the end of spring.
Right, because they won't have
Mitch
Kai Jeter.
Kroger.
Or Mitch Jeter's the kicker, Kai Kroger's the punter. Got it.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll have all that, plus a few more observations, since there will have been at least a few more spring practices between now and next Wednesday. And if y'all don't want to wait until next Wednesday to get updates, you don't have to. Just go to GamecockCentral.com, read everything that Wes and Chris and Colin and everybody over there is going to be posting in terms of updates, in terms of thoughts, developments, any news that we get on injuries or anything like that, all at GamecockCentral.com. And, of course, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, where you get this podcast, Colin and I finishing the basketball season strong, hoping that the basketball season takes our lead and does the same. We'll be back on Thursday. Colin and I and Wes, Chris, and I will be back next Wednesday. Thanks so much for listening. Y'all have a good week.